So for chapter 1, the practice of statistics. To summarize what we're going to be accomplishing in this chapter is we're going to unpack what a study is. So you may have heard the word study in the past. To study means literally to observe, to try to get more information from. But this word comes up a lot in media, in our disciplines, right? So if you've ever taken a psychology class, right, a lot of the ideas and concepts that you learn come from studies. But what is a study and what makes a good study? That's what we want to learn in this chapter. So to begin with that, let's think about, go back to your elementary school days and think about what it means to use the scientific method. So if it takes you a moment, there's a lot of examples. The ones that are the more colorful examples are, for instance, Newton sitting in his backyard and the apple falls on his head and suddenly he comes up with the idea of the theory of gravity, right? But more rigorously and more generically that we can apply to lots of different disciplines, the scientific method roughly goes like this. So step 1, come up with a question. And sometimes that's given to you. Actually, a lot of the times that's given to you, but sometimes, especially for those of you who much later on may be doing research, that's actually something you come up with, right? And you, in observing and understanding more deeply about the specific field you're studying, will have questions, and they'll come up. And this is an essential part of the process, right? You don't want to study anything unless you have something to motivate you. You come up with a hypothesis. So a hypothesis, the typical explanation of that is educated guess, right? It's a little more than that. Usually you have observations already that help you develop your hypothesis, but importantly, the next step is you collect your data, right? And you have to have a solid plan for collecting that data. From who or what subjects are you taking that data from, under what conditions. Then you analyze the data. Oops, I misspelled that. Analyze your data. And so you may form a model, or you will organize and display your data. You'll come up with an idea of what is average, what is usual, what's unusual. And once you have that, then you can, affirm your hypothesis, so you have evidence to back it up, or you go back to the drawing board and you come up with a new hypothesis. But importantly, you do have to report your results, right? You can't just say, oh, I developed this hypothesis and it was right, without explaining that you actually had 4 or 5 ideas before you're winning one. So this is a rough outline of the scientific method, and it actually aligns very, very well with what we call statistics. So I want to just briefly talk about what we're going to be learning in this chapter specifically. So let's go over the learning objectives. So our first is to differentiate, so to distinguish between different types. differentiate between different types of data, because we're going to see that there's actually many different kinds, and dimensionalities. So without getting too much into it, dimensionalities of data tell us how complex it is, right? Whenever you're filling out a form, you're going to have multiple different fields, but that are all linked to you uniquely, and that's an example of different dimensionalities. We're going to identify and apply appropriate sampling methods. Sampling is the process by which we collect data. And this will be very important, because if you don't have the appropriate sampling methods, then your data may be as good as garbage. Lastly, we're going to identify and apply appropriate experimental design principles. And why that's important is because when we're thinking about how we want to study something, it's not sufficient to think about how we collect the data, but from who are we collecting the data, with what purpose, under what conditions. And there's some other interesting design principles that'll be really important for getting as clear a picture and as accurate a picture as possible. Okay, so with that, those are the things that we're going to be talking about